Go on, please.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. In Edinburgh, Dr. Sol and me would like to present some of the ongoing results that are derived from the project that we have in common. The title of the presentation is Between Research Approaches and Research Challenges. We thought it would be more practical to talk about the practical difficulties we have been facing in the field, and the first part of this presentation is going to be taken by Dr. Sole, so I give her the voice. Sole, please go ahead.
Thank you, Milton, and thank you so much, everybody. I just I feel almost emotional when I watch that video. I think it's, it's so nice, and it's everything that we want back, isn't it? Like to be able to be in a room and to share ideas and not to have to be constantly connecting through a screen that we just became too used to doing. So it's so good. I'm really pleased, Maritina, Carlos, Veronica, and Jorge for helping to organize this is fantastic. And actually, I received an email this morning from our regional office in Santiago, the University of Edinburgh office in Santiago, telling me, "Are you aware of this event?" So it has reached beyond our kind of networks to other networks. So well done, everybody. And I love to see this, seeing this enthusiasm and yeah, it's brilliant. So we just want to go through a number of broad things here. Of course, we are all super busy. We're all sort of overwhelmed with our teaching and our research and everything else that we try to do. So there's a number of ideas here that we want to share with you, but principally we feel that you are all going to be the drivers of the future worlds that will be starting after this crisis. And we wanted to share some experiences on what we feel is important to think about, and how we have managed to continue our work around research through the project that we have with Milton and colleagues across the two countries. So happy to have a discussion afterwards, but basically I think this event should be about you and your aims and your activities for the future as a group of students that are coming from such range of backgrounds and countries and nationalities and contexts. So so these are just very brief ideas. So Milton, please go ahead. Okay, yeah, so so the first thing we wanted to say was the sort of where all of this comes from in terms of our interest across the University of Edinburgh initially, and as we share this with colleagues in Latin America and beyond, how we can we're seeing how much and we're recognizing how much cities and urban areas are changing, but we are constantly rethinking about this change or we have too much thought about this change in using models and ideas that come from the north and that were developed over the last 50 years, and they might not be sufficient to really explain and understand the way places change. So we need to rethink about these concepts. We need to generate a sort of new set of tools and approaches and vocabularies that help us understanding the urban and the urban condition. And we feel that through the interaction between these kind of different experiences and regions, we could achieve these. So the research projects that we set up are very much based on rethinking the normality of understanding the urban, contesting the sort of formal, informal sort of perspective or binary perspective, and looking at the challenges in urban conditions from an interdisciplinary approach. Which you can pass to the next one, which draw on political and economic perspectives, which also draw on social and cultural aspects, on perceptions and aesthetics, ways of thinking about cities. So we feel that perhaps this set of interlinked components through research and teaching. So we have the students here are part of our master program on which is called Urban Strategies and Design, which really tries to move away from thinking only about the sort of visual conditions in cities, and interlink a number of questions and challenges around the way cities change, and develop proposals to tackle these challenges from different perspectives. It's a very open and interdisciplinary master. So in relation to research, we have focused particularly on the change that the Global South has experienced. And our personal research portfolio relates a lot with Latin America and Latin American cities. You can go to the next, Milton. The way that we have tried to interlink our research with the program, the master's program, is through engaging students with some of the questions that we have explored in the places where we have undertaken research. So you can see that students have been to Mexico last year, but our students have been to Medellin, have been to Sao Paulo. We also work this year, for example, here in Edinburgh. But the kind of links of experiences, the differences in these experiences is probably the sort of driving element of this. So the way that we feel that we need to think about research in emerging cities is perhaps with a range of lines of inquiry. So we do need to consider the sensory perceptions, the psychological, the cultural, and the values that are guiding our representations and questions of cities. But we also need to understand the social and cultural interactions that are formed within emerging urban areas, the livelihoods, the issues around education, work, different types of uses within these conditions, and particularly the inequalities and differences that urban places are creating. We also need to think about policy and normative frameworks. So we need to understand how governance mechanisms are creating relationships, are allowing for negotiation and participation and engagement across cities as they grow and change. And we also need to think about spatial geometries and the way that cities are linked, or decision making around cities is linked with technologies and territorial histories, as well as tackling environmental and territorial relationships. So these are sort of four potential approaches to tackle these problems. And we have taken a number of research projects, which I briefly introduce next, if you want to go to the next one, to see how we can achieve improvements and impact around these areas. So we know that in the next 30 years, 90% of the urban population will continue to grow and will happen in all sizes of cities. But we do feel that as cities grow, there are weaknesses that we are identifying around issues around risk, which is partly what the project we have with Milton and the team in IPN is trying to deal with. But also we need to think about climate, we need to think about forms of governance, access to resources, management of resources. And we feel that the approach should be based on empowerment. So thinking about how we help creating connections between communities, decision makers, and governments, as well as other organizations within society to create the opportunities for inclusive change, and to break disciplinary boundaries in the development of potential collaboration and partnerships. And this is what we have explored through our project. Sorry, Milton, you can go ahead. I'm sorry I have to do that. But so so we do base this approach. We know that this is not an easy task. It will require complex relationships and complex collaborative agreements. But we do feel that what we need to really tackle is, I don't know, that hand is up, or I'm not sure. What we need to tackle is the conditions of poverty within these areas. Do you feel like you need to ask a question now? I don't have your name. There's someone, or just continue?
Just continue. We will do all the questions in the end of the.
Okay, okay. Um, so what we know is that there's some decision that is being made at the macro scale, and all of this is driving the way cities grow. There's some differences between the global south and global north in relation to the use of resources, the sort of the implementation of urban services and systems, but we do also need to understand how places are affected at the local level, at the neighborhood level, directly working with people. So we need to understand these vulnerabilities at the neighborhood level. So, for example, some of our research has been looking at the development of strategies in a way that are co-produced and co-designed, that allow for knowledge exchange and development, interaction, and for empowerment of those directly affected by these challenges. Particularly, Milton, please go ahead. Particularly, our project has been trying to think about how these conditions that are at risk now could be much worse as we move towards changes in relation to climate. So we want to help cities and vulnerable communities with our research to build resilience to and recover from challenges that are at the intersection of risk, disaster, a number of conflicts around poverty, informality, and population displacement. And we feel that these problems and challenges are worse when we look at cities which have weaker governance and financial capacity. So we have councils that don't have the resources. We have cities, so Medellin, for example, here is a very, very well organized city in terms of public participation and inclusion of communities in the use of resources and in making decisions around their territories. However, in Puebla, for example, our research has been evidenced through our research that the lack of organization within communities really creates a barrier in the way places change, particularly when in the context of implementation of plans that are designed at the local authority level with little opportunity for consultation. Milton, please. Sorry, I hope this is not too long. So the issues on displacement and were part of our work. So this is just to show that there are a number of ways and perspectives, and students have tackled these issues as well. So we have organized a number of events, but also tried to develop knowledge and ideas and develop research agendas around these issues in different areas. So comparing experiences around displacement between Latin America and Africa, for example, was part of the reason of this event, which generated a number of questions that would be very useful to develop further research around. Please, Milton, go ahead. The idea of understanding the sort of local challenges around areas that we're working with and working directly with communities has been a sort of essential aspect of our work. And the way we developed this project was very much trying to generate an exchange with local interests and understanding the sort of national and international level trends that were implemented in Medellin. with the sort of broad aim of innovation, and question these around the issues around different levels of income, the growth of areas in the city with much inequality. And we think that we need to, rethink about this, notion of how we develop the cities in a way that in a way that we move away from the disparities between informal and formal, and we sort of move away from the concentration of power and wealth. Sorry, you can go to the next one. So this project, I mean, there's a lot already available in it, but I feel that this project has helped us understanding the research agenda around the priorities that different parts of the city and different conditions within the city have experienced. So if you go to the next one, Milton, or yeah, so part of the work in Medellin was led by this project, was based on trying to tackle the risk of landslide, and this is interesting because it is a risk that was identified by science, was identified by government institutions that were trying to map the different areas of the city and understand where risk was higher or lower, and where risk was able to be mitigable or not. But the perceptions from people living in these areas were very different. So the risk that they felt were exposed to was not of landslides. It was much more related to access to jobs and access to resources. And we wanted to understand all of these different perspectives, all of these different perceptions around the challenges these areas were exposed to, and help looking at developing sets of strategies that would allow for community resilience and eventually adaptation, but also strengthen the relationship and the collaboration between a range of institutions. So if you go to the next one, in this case, we worked with communities in Medellin to look into how could they get involved in first understanding these risks in the context of other issues that they were exposed to, and second, participate from processes of monitoring and mitigation of these risks through a number of strategies around communication and data collection, but also participating directly in improving the conditions of these areas in relation to water drainage and improving the way water runs through the neighborhood to avoid landslides. So if you go to the next one, Milton, please. So we also worked in Puebla in Mexico, looking at monitoring and understanding the risks related to climate change. We worked with different forms of communities all together. We tried to map the risks these communities were exposed to. We tried to create new relationships between community and government organizations, to the development of strategies that are able to maybe to continue with some of the activities and habits these communities had in the past, such as agriculture or participation in decision making around heritage, for example. But the issues that I mentioned before about the different levels of self-organization that Medellin presented in comparison to Puebla really affected the way that we were able to implement these strategies. And in the case of Puebla, was through social media and through widening the knowledge of these potential risks through working with within community centers and schools. That we were able to really raise awareness and allow communities to participate. So if you go to the next one, this is just some examples to how we develop the research. So the notion of participation and inclusion and really understanding these challenges from the perspective of those that are directly involved with the impact of these issues on the ground. So people that live in vulnerable places, or people that have been faced by changes in their economy and their income because of the changes around their jobs or their access to resources. There's many of these communities that had originally agricultural land, and this was changed to develop the area further. So if you go to the next one, just to give you an example, all of these sort of strategies and ideas are based on this overarching question of helping communities and local authorities, as well as civil organizations, to collectively negotiate risk management. So this is the broad objective of this projects. I see that there are some comments. So we should address these intersectional challenges through developing tools and data sets and knowledge to empower them, and work in partnership with local and national governments to innovate, build resilience, and change concepts and attitudes to reduce risk, and particularly through actions and programs that will generate change in the long term. And please go ahead, Milton. Just some examples of this sort of things that we try to do, but it's about dialogue of knowledges, understanding the different perceptions. We know what could be happening in terms of climate at the sort of broad scale, but we can sort of create a new set of values if we adapt those ideas to the very small neighborhood community scale in the changes and in development of cities. So this sort of dialogue of knowledges is very much a driving force of our research. Please go to the next one. She's gone. She's already there. So empowering communities and negotiating and reaching agreement with governments, I think, is a key role for academic institutions, trying to facilitate dialogue and generate collaboration for future change. Please, Milton, go ahead. And these are just final thoughts about what sort of relationships and negotiations are sought to think about resilient socio-economic systems as we move forward. We need to really engage with local communities, because they, in the case of our projects around climate change, they are the ones that know how they are directly affected and have ideas to mitigate or adapt to these issues. So we cannot think about these challenges so much in a broad scale. We also, in a large scale, we really need to connect this to the realities of each place. We also need to engage with other sort of organizations within cities. This is coming through very clearly in some of our projects around water management, for example. Business and how do we redefine economic systems and models, but also how do we share responsibility in terms of developing actions and programs for activities in these areas. We also need to think about the role of local government. So how do we engage local government? How do they have a sort of clear role for change, even with little resources? How policy can lead to real change. And how can we do that? So I think academia has a really interesting role in bringing together public, private, and community organizations, obviously around this issue of resilient socio-economic systems. We need to think about perspectives and dialogue of knowledges. So the perspectives are not only those that we already know from scientific research, and we also need to think about have an open mind in the creation of new ideas. We need to co-create and co-produce new ideas. Milton, I think you were going to, yeah, okay. So I think this is probably a summary of what we have done. So bringing all of this broad interest into a particular project that Milton will present now, I think is very useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sole. Many thanks for this invitation. In the second part of this presentation, I would like to talk about the obstacles and difficulties we have been facing in the field in the course of this research. Sole already talked about these approaches and what are we finding as the main challenges, so to say, for this for the realization of this project. In November 2017, the IPN and the University of Edinburgh co-signed a collaboration agreement for academic and research activities. This was the beginning of a very rich and academic exchange of initiatives and teamwork proposals, just to have this this framework. The first opportunity that we had to collaborate together was in 2019, when this call from CONACYT ESRC was opened. This was a call, a Newton call for collaborative research on smart cities. The main goal of this call was the promotion of smart cities to support resilience. And we participated in this call with a project proposal entitled Developing Co-Created Smart City Solutions for Managed Adaptation and Monitoring of Hydrometeorological Climate Change Related Risk in Mexico. We had a positive feedback, and the project started on June 2019, and it has to end at the end of this year. So what are the points of departure for this project? Well, every day we use technology for mobility, for communication within a city or worldwide. And we can do this consciously or unconsciously without realizing it. We ourselves are a sort of providers of information to conform large databases every day that go someplace. Such technologies gaining an impressive impulse during the pandemic. But what happens if we make this process more conscious and apply it to the resolution of urban problems? What happens if we apply technology for flood preparedness and adaptation in Mexico City? What happens if we were able to bring together under the same umbrella all the efforts that are being made in this direction, considering the interest of population, government, and universities? So what would be some of the steps required to reach such a goal? Well, very briefly, we have three main objectives for this project. The first objective is to investigate how communities adapt to local climate change risks, understand their perceptions about these local situations, the perceptions of institutions, and trying to understand the role of private and public sector organizations. A second objective, a more operative objective, is to develop and test co-created technological tools to communicate, to monitor, and mitigate flood risk in vulnerable communities. Above all, the goal is to integrate the community knowledge in the co-production of this technology. A third objective is, once we get this goal, the third objective is to scale up or to roll out at a wider scale with other communities. So at the end of this project, we would like to have certain influence and national or local policies related to climate change risk management. So as for the case studies, the selection of case studies was the result of a process with some selection criteria, worked always together. On a first place, we thought about some criteria for the selection, like hazards, vulnerabilities, resilience mitigation tools observed in some case studies or potential case studies. Subsequently, these criteria were refined with both themes, and we thought about urban location, income, exposure, the presence of community governance structures, access to community representatives. I mean, uh, we could have some potential cases, but if access to information is not at hand, it would be very difficult to consider such neighborhoods. And potential plans, the existence of potential plans from government institutions. So this is the first case study, El Peñón neighborhood. It's located on the slopes of the El Peñón hill. If you are going to the airport, you may see a hill with a radar on the top of the hill. On the slopes is located this neighborhood. In 1961, the city's vehicular ring road, Circuito Interior, and the metro line station were built there in this area. And with that, the area became geographically defined. But these constructions created a sort of dam effect that reduces the runoff from the Peñón Hill, causing multiple floods in the area, so recurrent floods. Due to the recurrence of this hydrometeorological phenomena, a rainwater in 2012, a rainwater recovery and storage vessel, so vasoregulador, was designed and built to discharge the drainage from the runoff of the area. The second case is La neighborhood La Colmena Ermita Zaragoza. It's located on the highway to Puebla, located in Iztapalapa municipality. This is an area that also suffer from floods, from cracks and subsidence risk. This neighborhood was occupied in 1976, so it was not an informal settlement. It was a planned formal settlement. The neighborhood is close to the storage vessel or vasoregulador El Salado that was constructed to regulate the rainfall water level with a height of 6 meters. And that's one of the hazards. So overflows of the vessel represent a hazard for the population, together with other factors like insufficient drainage infrastructure, loss of slope, and other circumstances. So I would like to present the whole team. So what I'm basing these short reflections on ongoing results that are not from a personal outcome, but from a group of efforts that are integrated by researchers from Edinburgh, researchers from IPN. We have in the team 2 postdoctoral students and 4 master program students in Mexico. And well, I would like to order these reflections in a way of challenges. The first challenge is the absence of co-produced or co-created and co-created technology in Mexico. That is the first thing. We noticed. We disposed of several apps applications to know about monitoring and forecasting of floods, monitoring early warning of weather events that are being delivered by the current governments. However, such applications were not designed from the beginning with the goal of being co-created or to have inputs of co-production with people. What are we considering as co-produced or co-created and co-created technology? Well, I would like to take this aside from Bacon Lambert. If citizens initiate the construction of the digital platform that is from the beginning, or deliberate in a representative body discussing its maintenance and design its co-creation, if citizens actively engage in the design and delivery of their personal services through a digital platform provided by the service organization, its co-production. The second challenge that we are facing with this is the issue of scale. We are working in a metropolitan zone with more than 21 million people. And along the presentation, as Sole continuously, and I'm using the word community, we use the word community that is at the center of the project, but what does it actually means? What could be the social, the spatial, the geographical delimitation of community, and which consequences has this reference in terms of risk management and distribution of responsibilities? I mean, what is the limit, the geographical limit for this community in terms of this risk management, and how to explore such limits? That are some questions that are being addressed by some members of the team. The third challenge is um, a sort of complicated coordination between several governmental levels. If we take a look at this slide, we may see that we have three different levels, three different governmental levels. On the top, a federal level; in the middle, a state level, in this case, the central government for Mexico City. We have the municipality level, and in the case of the risk mapping, we have found a diversity of tools, instruments that each level uses. For example, if we see at the top, at the federal level, we may see the CENAPRE, the National Center for Disaster Prevention. They put at our disposal a risk atlas for the whole country. At the state level, we may find another risk atlas with a different platform, another digital platform. We may see the department for potable water that uses another tool, another digital tool. They may share the same radar for the forecasting of weather. However, we may find them in different communication tools. After that, we may find the municipality level that uses another system for risk mapping, and at the bottom, we may find the population that uses or creates themselves another kind of mapping to risk and document past flooding damages. So this may create a kind of questions and maybe confusions for the inhabitants. So which source of information may I attend to? And in fact, this analysis of institutions was a particular and individual input for the project made by Mildred Moreno. I am not going to go too deep here. The fourth challenge is that we have a recent, relatively young or recent legal framework for risk management. If we see this timeline, we may see the context in which the instruments for risk management have been created in the last 50 years. And we may see that the general law for civil protection goes back to 2012 with an updating in 2014. In 2019, it was issued the law for integrated risk management and civil protection for Mexico City. Concerning co-production and co-creation, the first document that we may find was issued in 2016 with the Agencia de Resiliencia, the Department for Resilience in Mexico City. That is the first time that we find the term co-production, and with the new administration, such department disappeared. And in contrast, we may see that the international context, the terms co-production, co-creation, co-design have been used since more decades ago, and in official documents as well as in governmental and academic production. So the next challenge, of course, is the current circumstances. The COVID crisis has forced us to think other strategies to go on with the project. The unfortunate loss of friends and local contacts, and administrative and financial uncertainty as an effect of the budget restrictions in the institutions that are financing this, like CONACYT, that is going through a radical restructuration process. And we have also to deal with this uncertainty. As a result of this COVID crisis, we have been also being forced to modify or to adapt our our methodological tools. For example, it was not possible to conduct more focus group or workshops in the site. We had to use another ways of gathering information and staying in contact with the population. For example, virtual focus group and other instruments of the sort. The next challenge is the process of technological appropriation. Even if we reach the goal of to get a co-created technology, we have to be sure that it will be appropriated by the community and the authorities. And how to ensure that we have to make an analysis and document the process of technological appropriation. The process, the appropriation is a whole process in itself. There may be attractors or factors or reinforcers that make people to appropriate or not, or to refuse the technology. And it is known also that technology has not an automatic and an equal acceptance. Some models distinguish between several groups of users in a sort of technology appropriation scale. So if we see this model in the horizontal axis, we see the time, and the vertical axis is the relative percentage of customers, of users. At the beginning, in the launch of a new technology, not everyone accept the technology. Some groups are the first adopters. We always may find some skeptical groups that use the technology once the technology has been more popular or became more popular. And the team will have to solve the technology appropriation scale gap. For example, we have to think about maybe on a sort of hybridization, different materials for adult people and so on. And finally, the last challenge, the challenge of trust. We are talking about communities that have been in the last years suffering from floods, recurrent floods, and a recurrent need of support, a recurrent expectancy of improvement. And the deliverables for this reason, or the products, must go beyond an academic goal. A concrete tool for flood risk management must be put in place. The local community is waiting for a concrete support, for a concrete response. So the room for error is very small. And I would like to give again the voice to Sole for concluding remarks.
Sorry, but someone was calling me. So yes, so I think I was just writing some notes as Milton was talking through, and I feel that there are a number of challenges in relation to the specific process of research, which I think are very well highlighted by Milton, and I think we can we can see these in the context of Mexico around the regulation and everything else, but we can also see challenges in the way that we undertake this research at a distance, and in the way we connect to communities. I do think that one of the points Minto made around the conceptual challenges is really key, and that relates back to my first comment around the development of languages and sort of tools and ideas and this idea of generating a vocabulary or a methodology to undertake research from different disciplines and in different areas in cities that are growing today. So we have as a team now an opportunity to develop this conceptual sort of thinking across the two experiences, and that is part of our work parallel to the actual field work and the research. We're beginning to discuss how we share our conceptual ideas, how we develop those, and how we create the resources to share these around books or publications, etc. So I think that there is another point that is really important, because our experiences are very different, and some of the questions that are beginning to appear in the chat I think relate to this. But in terms of the actual research and what we are aiming to help with this or to provide a solution for, we really need to understand the way that the existing vulnerabilities are intensified, in our case by climate-related events. So we need to understand that we're not just looking at the data at the broad scale, but we are looking at the data at the local neighborhood scale, and we are looking at particularly how these impacts are not just new, but relate to existing vulnerabilities. And what the perceptions are around these, because the way that potential issues around climate change could affect different parts of cities will change and will change in relation to the different vulnerabilities within them. And the other point that we really want to sort of engage with, and I think is more difficult in some ways, and again, it was illustrated by some of the points made by Milton, this notion of co-development or co-production. So on the one hand, we are trying very hard to empower those that are more vulnerable and directly affected within these communities where we're working. And I think that has been extremely positive. But on the other hand, we also need to engage with the local authorities and the institutions that are actually developing policy and programs to make sure that whatever we develop at the local scale is then taken further to a much wider scale and perhaps implemented beyond these neighborhoods across the city. So that is where I feel that we still need to make sure that that dialogue and the strategies for that dialogue are continuous and constant within the project. So the overall approach, as we said before, is to help cities and vulnerable communities to build resilience and to understand their sort of the impact around risk and disaster. And the ways in which these processes engage not just with the realities of these neighborhoods, but also with the governance of the city, with governance mechanisms, and allow for discussion and participation. And then the final point that we want to achieve is this issue of developing tools and data sets and different forms of knowledge that will help communities, but will also help governments and other stakeholders to develop innovative and resilient ways to undertake risk reduction and think about the long term. So I think, in a way, what this is kind of leading to is, if we look at how we can manage change in our cities towards the future, we need to think about participation and engagement directly with those more vulnerable, and for these we need to break barriers, we need to understand the different needs and perceptions, and we need to see innovative ways in which communities and governments can work together. We also need to understand the different forms of knowledge, so we need to think that we don't have only one set of expectations and understandings of the way the city should grow. And finally, we do need to engage with leaders and decision makers and in a way politics through this process, politics and economic development within cities through this process. So I think this is just a summary, but I'm happy to discuss and hear questions.
Thank you, professors. It's very interesting to hear about these magnificent researches that demonstrate that today's technologies, teamwork, and transdisciplinary work can lead us to develop useful projects. And so that with this type of now we have heard the professors, let's hear the students. First, we have Maritina, who worked on the housing and habitat theme. Her project builds on this finding to further analyze the social and spatial boundaries that exist in the space of Mexico City. The project builds its analytical framework on placemaking to suggest holistic solutions towards an integrated, inclusive, and connected city. Remember that you can write down any question or keep it to question and answer QA session. Maritina, you may begin. Thank you.
Thank you, George. So I will start straight away. So this report was produced under the theme of housing and habitat and aimed to explore a holistic approach to the improvement of habitat of low-income neighborhoods as a way of overcoming the territorial stigma of marginalization and integrate them into the city fabric. The steps taken towards that aim include the exploration of the theoretical framework of the right to the city as an overarching concept of inclusion and integration. Then follows the introduction of placemaking as an analytical tool of evaluating the Mexico City context, including policies, government programs, and case studies. And the results of this analysis were used to form a strategy that addressed the weaknesses and highlighted the strengths of the existing conditions. This included design guidelines for the neighborhood improvement programs and a vision for their implementation towards an integrated and inclusive urban landscape. The trip to Mexico City and the work for the first part of the urban project revealed as main challenges these of affordable housing shortage, lack of efficient infrastructure and utilities connections, increased insecurity of displacement, crime, isolation, finance, and natural disasters that mostly affected the vulnerable population of the city. Based on those findings, the work for this second part started by using the right to the city and to adequate housing as the theoretical framework to examine the importance of public participation in the formation of space and development of sense of belonging to the city. So moving to the analytical framework, the practical expression of the theoretical framework was found in the placemaking approach. Placemaking generally has been defined as the way that any place is transformed into a place for living and contains the dynamic evolution of that place through the social interactions, physical interventions, and actions of the people who use it regularly or occasionally. It involves the construction of the physical space in a good location with efficient connections, infrastructure, and safe housing, builds a community with participative decision-making, common identity, and spaces for shared activities, adds use value with variety of uses, quality of urban realm, and ease of movement, and overall contributes to an integrated part of the city. The framework was completed with the creation of a tool that combines the physical, social, and activity parameters into a simple tool that allows the reflection, documentation, and visualization of the quality of a place in a structured way, while highlights the strengths and weaknesses that should be considered in the improvement process of that place. So the research framework overall was completed with a review of international documents on sustainable urban development in general, but also specifically for the Mexico context, to examine if and how the previously mentioned concepts are incorporated in the guidelines. Even if direct mention of this concept does not happen, there is a clear request within all these documents for inclusivity, consolidation of precarious settlements, equal access to services and employment opportunities, and diverse and safe housing. So moving on to the analysis of the Mexico City context, rapid urbanization that started in the 60s with the inflow of rural immigrants and the production of settlements on urban land at the edges of the city has resulted in the expansion of the city that even if they were consolidated and absorbed by the city through urban land tenure legalization programs, but instead of fixing the issue, it contributed further to the uncontrolled expansion in the following decades. However, in the same time, dispersal policies and neoliberal policies have pushed people to the edges and the periphery of the city, leading to a heterogeneous image of low densities mixed with concentrated areas of high density in between. Later on, the commodification of housing brought by the neoliberal policies in the 80s attracted private developers who promoted the construction of gated communities for higher income groups, and they were connected with the city mostly by car through expressways that divided the existing low-income neighborhoods and encouraged segregation, which affected the quality of public space. The first map here shows the distribution of population in poverty in a municipal level overall, but the effects of what I mentioned are not really visible unless you look at the micro scale of the marginalization in micro scale that occurs in Mexico City and is better represented in the measurement of the extended urban block that is used in Mexico. So the city tends to be fragmented in a micro scale level, and poor neighborhoods are create small islands of marginalization between high income areas, and the different socioeconomic classes live next to each other in close proximity, yet they do not blend. The isolation of both sides creates symbolic boundaries between them and develops the perception of different cities within the city. The upper classes isolate themselves in protected, exclusive, and high quality environments on one side, while the disadvantaged remain isolated in the low income settlements. Their interactions are rare and happen under controlled conditions by avoiding public spaces, which end up abandoned. And the lack of sense of belonging is reinforced by the lack of these social interactions and creates a sense of insecurity and fear of encountering strangers that exist across the different social classes. Those boundaries create the perception of an us and them, which combined with the persistence of inequality and precariousness stigmatize the urban poor. The stigma of marginalization widens the gap between the different social strata and leads to further disconnection from the urban space, affecting deeply social solidarity and cohesion of the city. At the final part of the analysis of Mexico City included the legal framework that exists and showed that there are good intentions in general from the new or progressive governments to recognize the right to the city in the Constitution and implement neighborhood and housing improvement programs that promote public participation. However, the lack of planning culture combined with the 3-year term of its administration has resulted in mayors giving priority to bigger projects that can be used for self-promotion rather than meaningful development. And on the other hand, the improvement programs have single interventions, are focused on single interventions that cover only parts of special and social or activity qualities of placemaking and fail to holistically improve an area and turn it into part of the city. So after looking how social and special fragmentation takes place in Mexico City and how the political framework has gaps, I moved on my research to conduct a comparative analysis in order to examine how all these different aspects affect the formation of housing and habitat production of low-income areas in the city. So therefore, I examined the cases of Tlatelolco Social Housing Project, the Palo Alto Cooperative, and the Neighborhood Association of Miravalle as three interesting and well-known examples of legal and cognitive ownership statuses that are found in Mexico City. For the comparative analysis, I used the placemaking tool developed earlier to identify the sense of ownership and identity felt among the community members, which in each case was different depending on how each case was developed historically and socially through time. Then I continued my analysis on the quality and scale of housing infrastructure, both critical and social, and the vitality and liveliness of the streets and public spaces in relation to their surroundings. So this is a graphic representation of these conditions in Tlatelolco. Here is the one in Palo Alto, and the next one is in Miravalle. I tried to incorporate different sources of data. So one of them was using data for Google Maps. And I tried to look at the locations and the distance of these case studies from the city center and calculate the approximate, measure their connectivity and accessibility to central amenities and services. A similar method was used to register the available uses in a 1 kilometer radius from central points within its community. And similarly, I used the same method to examine the permeability of these communities and their walkable connections to their surroundings. So in these cases, the orange arrows are the car traffic, and the dust yellow ones are the walkable connections to the surroundings. Moving on, I also used data from INEGI to record the density of the built environment per block, including housing and population density. In the end, the results were summed up visually with the use of the placemaking tool. Overall, Tlatelolco fits the special requirements for connectivity, density, and amenities, but lacks in shared identity and quality shared spaces to enable the communal sense of belonging. On the other hand, Palo Alto fits completely the definition of community with a strong identity and sense of belonging, but the hard physical boundaries with its surroundings and the city and the constant struggle of the community to maintain their land has contributed to their isolation. And finally, Miravalle is a great example of an informal settlement where the residents have organized as a community and use city programs to improve and create their shared spaces for the neighborhood. However, poor access to urban amenities and the housing conditions still keep this neighborhood disconnected from the rest of the urban fabric. So the above conclusion of the analysis of the Mexico City context, its political framework, and the comparative analysis of the case studies then informed the need for a vision for the city that is translated by this special integration diagram, where areas are recognized as low or high marginalization, and the vision is for them to be integrated with each other and the city center through merging areas at their limits and places of interest in focal points of its area. This vision was the basis of my strategy that proposed certain design guidelines that are looking to address the boundary conditions in relation to the four scales found in a city, and they could be used as a tool for planning authorities for guidance when building planning policies and updating improvement programs, or used even by professional teams when they work with communities in the planning and design processes of their neighborhood upgrade efforts. So the first guideline refers to the city scale and the need to treat hard edges created by infrastructure, and proposes that conventional hard infrastructure can be engineered to double as soft infrastructure and accommodate additional social, public uses, which apart from having special and social benefits, they can also have cost-effective benefits in the long term. Usually this is an issue when talk about big projects with the city authorities. So the second guideline refers to the neighborhood scale and addresses the need to create the notion of centrality by concentrating different uses and combining them with elements of interest and activities, so that every neighborhood has its own center that attracts people from their neighborhood, their surroundings, but also from all over the city, as shown in this diagram over here. And in the scale of the block, the third guideline suggests to treat the edges of the residential buildings as zones of exchange between the public and private sphere, where transparency and uses of particularly the ground floor would allow what we call eyes on the street, which contributes to a sense of security on the street level for the pedestrians, and also generates activity and creates spaces of interaction of the inhabitants and visitors. And then on the scale of housing, the fourth guideline suggests the vertical expansion, which is quite common in colonias populares in Mexico City, where we're leaving unfinished the last floor and maybe develop it later when there is available funds. Was found around the areas that we have visited. So this concept, if done in a planned way, could accommodate high densities with small building footprints by using the connections already in place. In general, vertical expansions allow for uses other than residential on the ground floor, which also contributes to the previous guideline. And combined with openings and balconies on the facades, can activate the building's presence and add value to a more lively street. So all these four guidelines that address the different urban scales can significantly contribute to the improvement of housing and habitat conditions, and they comply with the placemaking principles that I examined in my analytical framework for integration. Its guideline might apply to more than one of the placemaking parameters, but they all kind of can work more or less in all of them. Finally, for the implementation of the vision, I proposed the expansion of the improvement programs, followed by the creation of a network of cooperatives to group community members and facilitate coordination and efficient execution of the upgrading interventions. The cooperative model would create a hierarchy in neighborhood and municipal level, and would enable the participation of every community member in the improvement process of the neighborhood that could have an effect in a municipal level, and then another general effect in a city level. So that was overall my outcome from the research that came out from the Mexico City trip and the research that was conducted here. But on a last note, I would like to close my presentation by mentioning that my work for this project has led to my decision in continuing into a PhD, where I will further study placemaking theories and their implementation in the Global South, with a focus to Mexico City. And on that, I would like to emphasize how last year's interactions with IPN students has created the chance of collaboration between the two universities. And in my case, particularly, I will be working with Veronica Zalapa from IPN, who has also been studying theories of place in different contexts, including Scotland. And we will collaborating in enriching our researches in areas that overlap. So in my case, parts of my research and parts of Veronica's research will come together to produce something new, and we'll see where that goes. Yep, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Maritina Iliadi. Let's keep our comments and questions for the last part of the session. Now let's move on with Lee from Mobility. Lee will provide an overview of his report, which explores notions on the right to mobility, social exclusion, and transport poverty in the context of CDMX Smart City Agenda. Lee, be welcome and go on, please.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. My presentation is more of my report, and it's not a PPT, but hopefully I can share my screen and you can let me know if you can see. And can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you.
Great, thank you. Let me see. Where do I don't know how, sorry, I don't know. I've not done it on this one before, so where would I even go to show it? Okay. So is it full screen for everyone? Sorry, I can't see.
Yeah, we can see your screen right now.
Great. So I was looking at transport poverty and social inclusion at the smart city. So in the smart city agenda, which Mexico City is putting forward and promoting over the last few years, one of the key issues from the literature and from our conversations with students, with communities, and with different experts that we met in Mexico was that it's the smart city agenda for Mexico City right now is not inclusive. There are very few opportunities for many people within the city and the informal settlements in the urban periphery to get involved in some of these more innovative and technology-driven public transport and other types of active travel and things like this, solutions that are being primarily focused in the central business districts across Mexico City. So what I wanted to do was use the approach from our fieldwork in Mexico City, plus a number of meetings and use of secondary data through various different policy, institutional and praxis-based reviews to look at what could be done to make a more equitable smart city, urban mobility strategy for the Mexico City. So apologies for it being a report, but hopefully it can still be of interest to you, and I will be sure to share it with everyone. So as you know, about a year ago, we were in Mexico City and I was part of the mobility group. So within that week we were there, we had meetings with students at various universities, IPENE being one of them. We had meetings with the World Resources Institute, Foreign Commonwealth Office, Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, PwC, and a lot of these organizations were working on donor-funded urban mobility strategies, right, across the city. So some funded by UK government, some by German government, some by the Dutch government. My background is development and multilateral development for like Asian Development Bank, UN, and the World Bank. So I had some connections, and we were able to meet people and basically look to see what is the key issues right now for access to transport or access to public transport. And from our findings in that 1 week of quite intensive field work in Mexico City, we were able to identify the challenges at 3 key levels. So the first one was at a strategic level. So at the kind of macro level there was issues with current laws, regulation, policy, issues, with politics and institutions themselves, and then attitudes and behaviors. In terms of planning, like the urban planning and transport planning, there's very, numerous issues with the integration of the existing transport planning system. And I'll go on about this a little bit more. And then at design level, so more street level, more localized level, there's a lack of inclusive and universal design. And that's something we see with walk paths, safety, and some of the issues like this. So we identified that these potential areas needed solutions and offered opportunities for us to collect more research. So what I wanted to do within this document was, analyze the literature and practice on smart cities, smart mobility, what that means for Mexico City, and look at these theoretical concepts of transport poverty and transport-related social inclusion. So to do that, I took an approach that looked at it starting as a global level and bringing it all the way down to like a local level. So in terms of tackling Mexico City, I looked at the megapolitan area and also metropolitan, but then also localized as well. And the idea was to come up with a strategy that could reduce transport poverty and social inclusion, but introduce solutions for increasing and expanding the smart mobility solutions in the city or across the metropolitan area. So to do that, you can see my approach down there at the bottom. There was a lit review, then it went on to data analysis, applying the theories and the analytical framework to the context of Mexico City, and then, you know, developing a strategy based on best practice. So there was different methodologies. There was autoethnography from our field trip, these various stakeholder meetings. You can see some of the organizations we met with there. C40 Cities, they're quite active in working with the electric buses network and GIZ and e-buses. And then we had these organized seminars as well, which allowed us that qualitative aspect to what the issue was. So essentially, yeah, there's no real strategy right now for smart mobility that includes or focuses on aspects like participation, access, informality, and poverty and inequality or vulnerability. So this is something I wanted to look at, and I wanted to challenge the idea that, you know, some academics suggest that you cannot make a smart mobility system or smart mobility system without causing exclusion, social exclusion, right? So I wanted to test that theory and see if that's actually true and put together a strategy. So mobility is one of the key parts of the smart cities agenda, you know, globally. In terms of smart mobility, there's two theoretical strands. There's the technocentric, so this is the idea of tech-driven, tech-led mobility, and this is applying information communication technology to transportation systems and the operation of them. On the other hand, where we would like to focus more, especially from participation and inclusion perspective, is the consumer-centric aspect, and that focuses on users' needs and issues and experiences and satisfaction, which from my review of the literature was less prevalent in the types of solutions and strategies that the Mexico City government, particularly people like Semovi and Sedatu, were implementing. So up the top, you can just see the types of different solutions, and you will know that some of these are, you know, available in parts of Mexico City. However, typically they're available in the affluent areas, the centralized business districts, the areas where people can afford to use such transport means and methods. Very rarely would you see these in places outside these central districts, and that was our experience there. So we were trying to think, how can we address them? So inclusion was a big issue. So I looked at two theoretical concepts which have not really been applied to Mexico City before. They're fairly emerging, and they are quite similar but cross-cutting. So the first one is transport poverty. So that's a multidimensional and systemic social inclusion of specific groups who do not have access to public or private transportation. Transport-related social exclusion is more related to the process by which they are excluded from participating in economic, political, or social life because of their transport inaccessibility. So looking at these, you can, they're broken down into like sub-dimensions with definitions and indicators. So there's mobility poverty, accessibility poverty, transport affordability, and then transport externalities. I found that very interesting because Mexico City has a high number of road traffic accidents, you know, high pollution that causes health issues. And these are, I guess, externalities you wouldn't normally associate with not having access to transport, right? But looking at it holistically, there's all of these different issues. So there was different ways to measure this. Same with transport related social inclusion. That looks at it at different levels and dimensions. So there's physical dimensions, economic, temporal, so time based, spatial and psychological, and informational. So I took these approaches and wanted to, you know, basically interrogate the literature that was available, plus use my own experience from the fieldwork to score and assess the level of transport poverty and transport-related social inclusion for Mexico City. To do this, I came up with an analytical framework to try and assess it. whereby I identified, analysed and evaluated the different dimensions of transport poverty and transport-related social exclusion, and then used them to basically define what urban mobility equity would be and what types of areas of interest that we would have to look at in order to make smart mobility more accessible and inclusive. So yep, I wanted to investigate conditions and characteristics of transport poverty, transport related social exclusion, analyze the context, causes, determinants, effects and impacts, evaluate whether or not my definition of urban mobility equity exists and to what degree, and then utilize all of the three previous steps to identify needs, challenges, opportunities, and then design a strategy based on this. So I'm just going to go over the next few slides are my assessment of Mexico City for across these theoretical concepts using the framework I developed. And then the second part that I'll be able to go on to is about the strategy itself. So as you all know, there are visions for urban mobility from the city. There's also the right to mobility. But what struck me is that the vision is quite human-centered, people-focused, and placing people at the center of all planning. But in reality, this is not necessarily the case, right? And this was shared with us from students, from different organizations. Looking at the mobility program that was developed with 100 resilient cities, they focus on safety, accessibility, efficiency, equality, multimodality, social co-responsibility, participation. But when you hear and when you read some of the qualitative reports, this doesn't seem to be the case for a wide demographic in Mexico City. So I looked at mobility poverty, and basically that's looking at a lack of transport options. And at this map here, you can see how there is a lack of transport options out with the city centre and the key business districts. So I was able to look at like the density of the transportation system, the public transportation system. So this would be the formal one, right? Not the informal, which there limited data is available on. And this would back up the idea that those living on the edges, on the fringes, do not have as much access to transportation as others. Then it can be, brought down by different areas and by different transport means, right? So how many people have to walk, the percentage of people able to use public transport like buses, metro, and then informal, right, like micros and other options. So the findings were basically that there's transport poverty, there's accessibility poverty. So if you look at this graph here, you can see that those in the high employment areas typically would have access to public transport and well-connected public transport systems which are integrated. But those in the informal communities, which are lower income, but still working, they have far less transport routes, modes, and are highly dependent on the informal transport systems. In terms of affordability, if you look at this map here, you can see the different types of the income levels, and then mapped out against where there is public transport routes. And quite clearly, again, you can see these informal settlement areas, peri-urban areas do not have well-defined or well-regulated transport networks. Sorry, I'll go a bit quicker. One of the other things was the fact that people are coming in and out of, the administrative boundary of CDMX from out with, right? From the, forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce it, but the zone, the valley, Zona Valley of Mexico City, right? If you look at this map here, people are coming from this one into the central district. So people are losing a lot of time as well, and there's different externalities. In terms of social exclusion, so this is exclusion caused by the lack of transport itself. There was a lot, on looking at physical aspects, which kind of brought in gendered issues, and how even some of the smart systems like EcoBC, which would be one, has a way lower female usership than men. So even where there are existing solutions, the physical aspects and gender aspects cause further social exclusion. In terms of economic issues, there's a lot of potential issues with cost, with affordability, but also the idea that micros and informal transport itself is unregulated, it's fluctuating, and there's no integrated payment system. So there is a smart card. We were able to see that and use it in Mexico City, but that cannot get you from A to B if you have to use informal transport for one of your modes. So it's very hard for that to work. And then temporal, one of the biggest issues was that basically, the timing of origin and destination is based on, is it how would you say, working hours? Is it going to be high traffic in the morning for people getting into the city or leaving after work? And you can see here that the time spent every day for people getting to, say, university, people getting to other facilities or their work. And that's one of the areas. Spatial inequality we've kind of covered, and then psychological inequality in terms of transport was there too. So looking at that, then I wanted to frame it in terms of what is the enabling environment for smart mobility to address some of these issues that I've just raised. So there are institutional and legal frameworks that are underway or have been implemented to an extent. So there's things like the digital knowledge city, turning Mexico City into an open data city, which would be obviously very important to map out transport related usership data. Yeah.
Lee, you have 5 minutes left.
Okay, let me get on to, right, so these are all issues. Let me get on to solutions. So digital access and the digital divide is a big issue. Data management is poor, but seeming we want to improve. And in terms of readiness for Mexico City to adopt smart mobility solutions, they're scored fairly high from various different organizations. However, when you look at the actual initiatives that are going on right now, they haven't necessarily been inclusive in their design and in their implementation. So what we have there is the bike sharing. There's been the aerial cable cars in Ecatepec, which have been successful. However, these are not obviously feasible in all parts of the city. The electric bus, if you look at the routes, highly centralized, and the transit system card again is not something that could be integrated and well used by everyone. Again, and another one is the data mapping. So there has been efforts to map the informal transport, particularly the micros. However, this is not well integrated onto existing other transport maps, and therefore the transport system added into the institutional fragmentation of the different public transport, private and public owners and regulators. This causes huge issues. So basically, I wanted to come up with a strategy or a vision that was going to have Mexico City as a recognized smart city that have smart mobility, something like Curitiba or Copenhagen or Amsterdam, where you can see them as a global leader which have a integrated, innovative and inclusive smart mobility system. So the strategic pillars were integration of human technological and infrastructural systems for smart mobility management, accelerating innovation through policy, partnerships and projects for the delivery of these solutions, and then enhancing inclusion by enabling access to mobility solutions and strengthening and participation and empowerment. So for the first one, the outcome would be basically an improved and coordinated mobility system with good governance, with connected digital technologies and efficient transportation. And this would lead to basically better governance of mobility at all levels. And this is something which is a huge issue across Mexico City right now. The utilization of tech, so using and sharing big data, open data, and using this data to inform smart mobility planning, integrating the systems. So integrating technology-supported, people-oriented public transportation infrastructure. So there's lots of actions here. I suggested that they replicate the Transport for London model. And yeah, I think probably it would be better for you guys to look at this in your own time, so you can go in detail with all of these, how to use digital technologies, payment systems, and how this is basically me mapping out how different transport modes could be, well, how ready they are to adopt different types of technologies. So the second one would be innovation, and that's looking at, demand-driven, human and technologically innovation to improve performance and learning in the delivery of smart cities. Looking at multi-stakeholder partnerships, so working with universities, NGOs, as well as private sector technology providers and things like this, and then piloting projects. So there's existing solutions and pilots which could be extended. For example, the jetty bus mapping would be one. And then there's the opportunity to replicate other projects. So the European Union has a project.
Lee, you have lost your audio.
We cannot hear you.
Oh.
Lee, we can't hear you anymore. Can you hear us?
Looks like he has technical issues. We lost him completely.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lee, for this interesting and enlightening approach. And now that we have heard our friends' research outcomes, let's welcome a new generation of students that have been working in Edinburgh this year, but that are adding up to future opportunities and activities. Today, we have two teams of students that are going to present the research. Let's welcome Wenhua, Yin, Shi, Sylvia, and Yishuan from China. This presentation provides a brief introduction about social and physical environment of Granton, summarizes the housing policies and management mechanisms, identifies the current issues and challenges faced by its residents. Thank you. Wenhua, Yin, Shi, Sylvia, and Yihuan, go on, please.
Well, thank you. So our group is focused on the housing in Granton, and we have focused on 5 parts. It's about affordability, residence, social space, land ownership, and age-friendly. So this is the background. During our field trip to Edinburgh City, the flourishing Portobello contrasting with the deprived Granton community drew our attention. So after that, we decided to keep the idea of making Granton a vibrant area as the overall target. This research values the interrelation between stakeholders, policies, and people-oriented design. So it provides a brief introduction of our social and physical environment of Granton, and the current issues and challenges faced by the residents. We expect to produce a guideline of what we can benefit the local community best. This is our methodologies. It contains 3 parts. This is the about Granton is now included as an urban area of Edinburgh. It is to the north of the city center and west of New Haven and Leeds. The Granton area is historical and industrial area which has a large harbour. Nowadays, the Granton area turns into a residential area, lacking vitality after the industry decline. In recent years, the Granton area's regeneration, especially the Granton waterfront, becomes a hot topic among urban designers. The most urgent demand of the area is to find a way of sustainable and inclusive growth for the former industrial area. Before 1920s, the year of the whole Granton area became part of the Edinburgh city. No large-scale housing was constructed in the Granton area. However, along with the harbor construction and the gas works, shipping buildings, fishing, and engineering businesses came to the area. Houses were gradually built as businesses came to the area. Built as tenements for working people. To the east side of the area, Trinity was developed into a mature living area with grander houses. The second half of the 20th century saw significant changes, with traditional industries closing, the harbor ceasing to be a center for fishing and cargo vessels, and generally few local places of work. A large part of the harbor was reclaimed to provide land firstly for commercial use, but more recently for other developments. From the beginning of the 21st century, Granton is actively seeking new development opportunities. The Granton Harbor was once expected to turn into a commercial center, but this ambition has not become reality. After the former business left Granton, most original residents moved away to seek new opportunities. Because of the relatively long distance and lower accessibility from the city center, Granton's lower rent became to attract low-income dwellers. Nowadays, the old housing areas named Royston, Pilton, and Warley became home of work-age newcomers, low-income dwellers, and multi-immigrants. The 2011 census showed that many people describe Granton as an area of constrained city dweller. The population of Edinburgh has a steady growth in the past 10 years, as the figure indicates. As mentioned before, due to the availability of low-value land, Granton has always been recognized as a perfect location to provide enough affordable housing and cope with the population growth in the Edinburgh City region. In the 2020 Granton Waterfront Development Framework, this area takes the responsibility to bring around 3,500 new homes. At least 35% will be affordable. Affordable housing projects brought Granton with a large lower-class population and making it one of the Edinburgh's most density areas. During the past 80 years, Granton has played a critical part in providing affordable homes, which partly result in the lower-class gathering. Besides, the stigmatization of Granton as an improved neighborhood prevents the middle class from settling in here. Hello, Hello. Hello. Yes.
Yeah. This is Wenhua, and I will introduce housing typology in Granton. There were detached house, semi-detached house, and bungalow. Next. Thank you. Flat and terrace house. There were a range of house types meeting the needs of a wide range of people. A goal that has been achieved that at least 20% of homes are 3-bedroom or above, cater for mixed family groups. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, and the next I will introduce the housing forms. The regeneration of Granton was led by City of Edinburgh Council, which in 1999 commissioned a master plan for the entire area. After this plan, the government was committed to making Granton a concentrated community, providing a large number of much-needed affordable homes for people living in Edinburgh. So Granton has a mixed tenure model for households that are owned privately and socially rented, with socially rented housing making up a large proportion of the whole. Next, please. Next, I will introduce 2 affordable housing projects in Granton. After a field trip to the Social by the Village, we found that Social by Village is a highly supported committee for up to 20 people affected by homelessness. The village is made up of 10 next houses, each shared by 2 residents plus an additional unit for staff. Next, please. Following the site visit, the following problems with implementation of this project were identified. First, there is only one multipath leading from the bus stop to the community, which is not clear and maintained in a poor condition, especially on rainy days. The second is that there are no clear demarcation between the community and its surroundings, giving residents a sense of insecurity. In addition, the vegetable plots provided to residents are not used effectively and are full of weeds, reflecting the lack of routine cleaning and maintenance by the community. Next, please. And after that, we also went to 55 degrees North Edinburgh. This project is ideally situated 2.5 miles from Edinburgh city centre, and it offers a wide range of room types and prices to suit different needs. Next, please. But we also find there are some problems with the implementation of this project. Firstly, it shows from the map that most of the restaurants are located in Newtown, Old Town, and Leith area, with very few in Grant area, which is inconvenient for the residents living here. Besides, the house is not surrounded by community center or large green areas to provide social and recreational areas. Except for a few trees, there's no green space inside the community with littered and unmanaged grass outside the community, affecting the living environment and views of residents. Last, in terms of amenities, the nearest major supermarket is 0.4 miles away, and there are no entertainment venues such as cafes and bars or commercial premises available nearby. Next, please.
So this is the population structure. And from the 2001 to 2011, the Granton's area's resident population increased by 4,000, and over 2,000 are people aged 20 to 44. Granton showed high attraction among youngsters, mainly due to the relatively low living cost in this area. According to Scotland's census, among these aged 16 to 74, almost half of the population is economically inactive. The relatively low level of educational background makes it difficult for these people to get decent work and affordable along a distance commute. In conclusion, the significant proportion of the young people or population in Granton, which should have been a critical advantage for its development, somehow turned into a problem of feral youth. This scenario mainly due to the lack of the appropriate job opportunities within the area, and as a result, the relatively high unemployment rate. Nowadays, the Granton area has a reputation for junkies and drunkards, and suffers a high child poverty rate. There is no cafe or any place for the young generation to have leisure time. The elder also lacks social areas. Lack of social interaction could negatively affect mental health and aggravates social segregation, especially in this pandemic. According to the survey conducted in 2018, and our group conducted the field interview during the past 4 weeks, and the fact that over 50% of Granton's households have no cars. So not enough and not living near service is a big problem. Under the scenario of pandemic, the mobility of residents in Granton is remarkably decreased. After the cross-analysis of household with no cars and income with no cars and income level, unemployment rate, and lone parents distribution data sets, our group found these areas, which marked in red, are most likely facing social segregation. What is more, considering the possibility of child poverty, countermeasures should be brought to deal with the problem. For example, social spaces, jobs, and public transportation improvements should be put these areas into in first consideration.
And I will introduce part fragmented land ownership. The basic land tenure in Scotland can be divided into three types: private, state, and community owned. Looking from the history, the land ownership in Granton has experienced a general but also unique process as a waterfront area. As the coastal line of Scotland's capital city, it used to be under the profound impact of federal systems. After that, land in Granton were held by three major landowners and also some small ones. The fragmented land ownership in Granton has a well-known impact. There was a master plan led by Council of Edinburgh City, which set a vision for the whole Granton to be a house leading area at the beginning of 2000, with its profile land and regeneration, and the competition between the respective developers of the land holdings made the housing market crowded with a single house type. Next, please. The initial master plans proposed by the separate landowners didn't have the conscience of unity. The areas were linked up only by some roads. The inconsistent master plans made from each main landowners all focusing on the building of housing, which led to a saturation of two-bedroom apartment housing market. Next, please. Through the two cases with similar history but entirely different outcomes, we can have more thoughts on the elements related to land ownership. It's believed that the public authorities should have the primary responsibility to deal with the development plans, to satisfy people's needs, and to ensure the implementation of the proposals. The post-industry period saw the land ownership in Granton becoming fragmented, which led to many unexpected results. Among them, the most influential consequence is the difficulty in having an integrated master plan for the whole area. In other words, the lack of leadership in the allocative and authoritative structures of land. By comparing with the prominent manifestation in the generation of the neighbor harbor lease, it's easy to see the distinguished gap between these two parts under the obvious disparate structure of land ownership. Next, please.
So this part is a noticeable challenge about aging-friendly housing. In the 21st century, the aging population is a global trend that significantly influences our society. Now, under this situation, the Global Age-Friendly Cities project was convinced and developed by the WHO and other organizations. The project aims to make cities more age-friendly to tap the potential that older people represent for humanity. According to the data from Census 2011, the number of old people in Granton aged 65 and over is around 1,620. A big group of less than the age group from 16 to 44 years old. However, a big group of people currently aged from 55 to 59 years old will get into a pensionable age in the future. Public services are necessary for old people in daily life. Living close to health and services is the most attributes. According to the figure, there are 4 health services facilities and 11 shops, including 9 local shops and 2 supermarkets in this research area. Considering the elders' mobility, Granton lacks health services, and as we can see from the picture, most areas in Pilton, which the white areas in the map cannot reach health facilities in 15 minutes. During the field trip, we found that uneven pavements can reflect the potential danger to the elderly who walk around and not friendly to those who use wheelchairs. In conclusion, to make Granton a better place to live in, it needs more infrastructure, more social spaces, and a grand master plan that could attract not only low class, but also middle class, high class citizens. I think that's it. Hello.
Okay. Thank you, Wenhua, Yin, Shi, Sylvia, and Yishuan. And now let's move on to our last presentation from Alex and Lily. They are from the USA. Welcome, Alex and Lily, and they will be presenting their work for Urban Project, an assessment of mobility and socio-spatial integration challenges in North Edinburgh, specifically in the Granton waterfront area. Welcome, Alex and Lily. You may begin.
Thank you so much for having us here, and we were not the only people behind this report. Alex and I are going to give a joint presentation, and we're going to try and move through this quickly. We also focus on Granton, so I'll try and move past sort of the stuff you heard in the previous group. We're going to be discussing the socioeconomic and social integration mobility in Granton. As you heard before, there's a lot of poverty in Granton, and we're going to talk about some of the historic context of that, as well as some of the maps ahead and what we've done as best as we could during 2020 for outreach, and then some lessons learned and what we're thinking of doing our project beyond. So as we learned, Granton is a post-industrial harbor town. It's primarily low income. It has been a redevelopment priority for the city of Edinburgh since the 90s. And we have concerns about gentrification tied to redevelopment. We're going to be focusing on two questions. How can this area with significant housing potential for Edinburgh, as we just learned, be redeveloped without negatively impacting the surrounding communities? And how can it be improved for its current and future residents? What is socio-spatial integration? A little bit of theory here to sparkle it in. There can be no spatial integration without social integration, thought one theorist. And Durkheim, pictured here, believed that social spatial integration was first conceived by him, and he thought that increased population density leads to loosening of traditional bonds of family, religion, moral solidarity, and then social integration occurs. It is always treated as a process, and it can be understood in opposition to other elements, such as physical exclusion of residents, functional exclusion, denied access to opportunities, relational exclusion, and symbolic exclusion, creating otherness. Looking at some of the maps we've tried to tear these down. So here's Granton in the larger Edinburgh region. There is a significant concentration of deprivation in a few areas in the periphery, but mostly in Granton, as seen here in the red, for income and unemployment. There's also a lack of home ownerships in Granton. And as we saw in the housing group, there's a lot of flats and apartments built. This leads to less housing freedom and less mobility within the city. There's also less access to public transport. So thinking about mobility in Granton, it's harder to move around. There's less bus routes, the tram doesn't go there, and there's less car ownership, not pictured here, but just trust me.
So one thing we did in relation to public transport is we looked at the catchment areas for bus and for the proposed tram routes. And this map shows the bus catchment areas. In darker red, we have the 400-meter catchment, and in lighter red, the 800-meter catchment. And so according to the literature on these catchment areas, people are willing to walk 400 meters or 5 minutes to catch a bus. And here what we see is that although some parts of Granton are under that 400-meter catchment, we have some significant areas that are not. They are within the 800-meter catchment, like we see in Pilton and Muirhouse. And in Granton proper, we have the tip of the harbor that is not even within the 800-meter catchment area. So that's more than people are willing to walk to catch a bus, meaning that we probably need some new bus routes or additional bus routes to complement the existing ones. We also looked at the tram catchment, and for tram, according to the literature, people are willing to walk about 800 meters. So when we did these catchment areas, we looked at the 400 meters, 800 meters, and then what was outside the 800 meters. And so the darker green and the lighter green, those are the 400 and 800 meter catchments. And what we see again is that there are significant portions of the area that are outside of that 800 meter catchment. So that means people will not have accessibility to the tram line. Well, there's no tram now, but the proposed tram. And these zones of poor accessibility are always falling within the neighboring communities that are disadvantaged, Pilton and Muir House more specifically. So when we superimpose these maps, we see that between the tram and the bus, there's more accessibility when you combine both of them, but we still have a significant portion circled in yellow, that's Pilton, and then the tip of the harbor. Those are not covered by either bus or tram networks.
So what are some of the causes of social spatial segregation? There are three main causes: power, social stratifications, and access. Power is uneven development, a sense of power in divisions of labor, who controls what space, wealth unequally distributed, and it's exploitative in nature. So you having more power and access means you don't have to put your body in the labor market as hard. You don't have to do lower income construction jobs. There's also social stratification, unequal network capital as distributed across traditional social stratifications, which leads to differential opportunities to access these goods, services, and social networks. Thinking about like who you can meet on the coffee shop, your ability to take coffee breaks if you so want to throughout the day and then go network, and then also access, distance, inadequate transportation, and limited ways of commuting, as Alex just said, which are pretty prevalent in some of the poorest areas of Granton. They're lacking access, they're socially stratified, and they're lacking power as well.
And in thinking about these causes, power, stratification, and access, one thing we asked ourselves is, well, what were the causes in this case? How did we get here? So to explore this, we looked at the history of the area, or the history of development there. And what we did is we divided it into two sort of significant periods, the deep history and the early history. And so to start with the deep history, this is from the 1800s when development started to the 1990s. What we see here is like in the early to mid 1800s, we have one big landowner, the Duke of Buccleuch, and he commissioned a harbor, he created new trade routes, he financed roads, he financed railroads. So he single-handedly is the one person driving development in the area. He made it become an industrial hub. And then when we get to the 1880s to 1890s, all of these industrial plants are establishing themselves in the area, and they are bringing along people, they're laborers, and they are settling in. By the early 1900s, we have a prosperous area in terms of industry. So it was great for the businesses, but the people, they were poorly paid and they were living in squalor. So to address those housing conditions and fix the market failure, the state drops in and starts building council housing. And after World War II in the 1950s to 60s, that's when we see council housing proliferate, because at this point we have the baby boom. So population is growing rapidly and the state needs to address this. They need to provide housing. And because those houses were built so hastily, they were poor quality and they lacked amenities. At the end of the 60s, the harbor was nationalized, and shortly thereafter it closed. And this was a major issue for the area because the harbor had been what had been driving industrialization. So then we get to the 70s and the 80s. In the late 70s, we have the Thatcher era. And under Thatcher and the Tory government, we see all of these policies and political stances that are really starting to bring down industry. So there's a deindustrialization process and people become unemployed, and the unemployment brings about other social problems. And most notably in Grantham, there was heroin addiction. And from the sharing of the needles that caused an epidemic of HIV and AIDS. And so this is how this area starts becoming completely stigmatized. And that stigma persists to this day. So in the 90s, to fix all of these situations, the government decides to reindustrialize the area. And then that falls through and they decide to change plans because we have a new government now. We have the Labour Party. So they were more about inclusivity and social inclusion and mixed developments. So that's how we get to the recent history, which is from 2000 to 2017. And this is the master planning era. After they decide they want social inclusion, then they started creating, the council started creating or commissioning all of these different master plans to develop the area. So they start with Llewellyn Davis, and the aim of this plan was to create a waterfront of international stature, but that also connected the neighboring communities physically and socially. But we have, at this point, we have three major landowners and they are fighting over the development. They cannot coordinate. And so that really stifled the implementation. So each landowner commissioned their own plans, and we end up with a melange of different visions for the area, from one that's historically oriented to one that's sustainable and energy efficient, and then the other one that's just purely commercial and business. And then again, we get to 2004, 2005, and there's another shift in policy because this time the city had hired a design champion and he thought of the city as a waterfront city. We have to make better use of the waterfront area. So now they want to create a tourist destination with an artificial island and a place that's vibrant and exciting. But then we get to 2006 to 2008 and things start going south. We have a tram project that quickly gets into trouble with financing and contractual disputes. And then there's an oversupply of two-bedroom upscale apartments. And then we get the Great Recession. So none of these plans are going anywhere. So by 2009 to 2011 or so, we see the council sort of step back and propose a more austere vision for the area and say like, okay, what we really need to focus on is connecting the little bits and pieces that we got from the previous master plans and create a coherent area that actually works for people and families. Some of the landowners, though, they continued with their grand master plans, and that's in particular the Ports Authority that owns the harbor at the top.
So looking towards what people think about and how they feel about living in the area, we had a handful of approaches. Because of the pandemic, some of them were a bit unconventional or newly conventional.
And in discussing those, we want to highlight that now at this point, from 2017 to 2020, we are operating under a new development framework. It still retains some of the more austere vision, but it also incorporates some of the elements of the previous master plans. And the goal now is essentially to, like I said, to coordinate everything and make it coherent and not disparate. And here in this picture, we can see that there's a lot of elements that are visible in the area today that come from those previous master plans. They're just not connected, and they don't form any sort of coherent framework or development for the place.
So thinking about how it feels to live in Granton, and not being able to really knock on doors or interview people on the street or take public transit in a real way or engage in the city with the city the way we would have hoped to, we turned to social media, Twitter in particular, current existing reports. We're really lucky that the city has been doing some outreach, and they have something called neat comments, which people put pins on maps and then say like, oh, it's too loud, this traffic is too much. And there it's visually displayed, and it closed. Those comments closed in December, and they ran for a few months before then. We were very thankful to be able to have that data. Previous research that also is very up to date from the city, Twitter, and we were able to do 2 interviews and with people one person who lives in the city and one person who did his PhD thesis on integration of Granton, which was very helpful. We also examined photos posted online about Granton. And these are the photos posted online on Twitter from Granton from 2018. And so we're going to examine 3 years of photos here and look at different themes that emerge and what the sense of community is trying to remember and memorialize about this area. What you can see in the main picture here, the collage photo, is the social bite housing that the previous group talked about. It was a main theme there. And the bottom photo is also related to that. It's inside one of these social bite houses. You can see also the waterfront and nature and some biking. So it's a very natural biking exercise area. That's what people like to memorialize about it. And then in 2019, we have some similar themes, but the gas holder becomes more prominent. This is a currently kind of abandoned facility that used to hold gas, and now it's more a photo shoot place that has bigger plants and has been folded into many of the grand plans Alex was talking about. More cycling and a cruise ship, and the cruise ships were negatively commented on in the social media, saying that they cause pollution, they don't like the tourists, they wish they weren't there, and also a bakery opened. So this one bakery opening in late 2019 becoming really prevalent in 2019 is kind of emblematic of how there's not very much going on in Granton if one bakery opening can have such a broad impact in our social media analysis. Thinking about 2020 and how that has changed everyone's lives profoundly, it became a lot more focused on Granton, and the pride in Granton really started to shine through. There's a lot of wild swimming that people took up. More photos, twice as many photos were posted in 2020 as in 2019 or 2018. The gas chamber started getting pictured at night, in the morning, during rain, at sunrise. It became a real icon and sense of place in the community. You had local gardens, vegetable gardens popping out, morning. Everyone loves going to Granton in the morning, walking around, seeing the sunset in the morning, taking coffee in the morning, going for bike rides in the morning, and a real focus on the small and close to you. Seen here as a little butterfly. We also analyzed this data, dividing each tweet into a person, like a real person, a business, tweeting as a business, or as a community, like a Granton Hub, which is a place for community development. And we analyzed that over 3 years, and we didn't want to do it in a vacuum. So we compared that to Leith, which is upstream, I guess maybe downstream, harbor area, very similar topography, but more developed, more recently developed. And looking here at the top, you see that there are very negative comments in the dark, leading to very positive comments in the light. And there's a similar theme there. There's some literature that suggests that these microblogs, which Twitter is, has a real mapping back onto what it feels like to live in the community. And you can characterize the sense of living there through understanding that. Looking at this, we also broke down the diversity of subjects that were tweeted about. So as I mentioned earlier, morning, you see here in Granton, is about half of the people in those 3 years were discussing Granton in the morning. The top is a starburst plot showing all of the tweets. Morning, project, and work come up the most. The bottom, you can dive into sort of what the content of the tweets are. And on the left, you see Leith, which doesn't have one dominant theme. There isn't a morning, it's just all sorts of different things. Leith has a lot more music venues, and we're not in any way saying Granton should become Leith. We're just noting the different diversity of uses and trying to understand ways to preserve what the community is really valuing and being able to understand what is valued in the community so we can help emphasize that, like mornings and nature. We also were able to dive into interviews more. As I discussed, we had 2 structured interviews. And what I want to highlight here is Mark, who is a resident of Granton. He really wants it to be for people of all ages. He was a little worried that with the current plans, which he was fairly familiar with, that there wouldn't be as many places for retirees, and he didn't quite know if there were enough schools being planned there. And we asked him, well, what's it people's perception of Granton? He said that there's nothing there, that it's a forgotten land. And then we were talking to Dr. Hamish Cullen, who did his PhD on Granton. He also said that the change is so piecemeal. And he emphasized that that they haven't done enough interest in past work to really make sure that people are living there now will continue to be able to afford it and have a sense of place. And he wants to make sure they aren't forgotten.
Okay, you have 5 minutes to wrap up. Thank you.
Well, perfect. This is pretty much one of our conclusion slides. So what are our lessons learned? There's a tremendous development potential here, but we need to make sure that it's not maximized for, rich people in a sense. We want to make sure that everyone, especially the residents who are there, need to be included in planning. And it has a stigmatized and deprived working class enclave. There's poor infrastructure, moderate to poor environmental quality, and it cannot be separated from the development proposals. We want to achieve a semblance of success in terms of mobility and spatial integration. And grant proposals haven't really worked for Granton in the past, so we need to be really realistic. Thinking more towards our project B, these are a whole series of questions we've come up with that we're going to start thinking about. Like, what is a comprehensive integrated mobility plan for Granton? How can the built environment improve the quality of life for existing residents? How do we work towards integration if we see that as a priority? How can we deepen the sense of community, highlighting what is already valued in this area? And that's our presentation. So thank you everyone for listening.
Alex, Lily, thanks for your presentation. It's good to hear new proposals and see through fresh eyes. Thank you all new student researchers. Thank you. Now, we will move on to the discussion panel. So please, Maritina, go on.
Yeah, thank you everyone for the wonderful presentations and the participations. I would like, before we start with a couple of questions that we have, I would like to ask the audience to kind of reflect on the, sorry, someone interfered. Anyway, I would like to ask the audience to reflect a little bit and give us their, maybe in the chat box, right? How do they find what they heard about this area of Edinburgh versus what's happening in Mexico City, because Granton is an area that has, it appears to have lots of issues. So what are your reflections on what is happening there versus what is happening in their city? Okay, so there is a question for Milton and Sole. If you're here, it says that you talked a lot about during your presentation about the need for co-production of knowledge in order to deal with risk management and develop projects towards resilience. But this is a lengthy process that requires time to spend time and build trust with the working community. However, the crisis seems to catch up with the crisis that happened against the COVID and so on, seem to catch up with such processes. What do you think is needed to accelerate them and get them to become incorporated, I guess, faster?
Well, thank you for your question, Lina. I think that the only way or the most important way to accelerate this is communication. Right now, we are designing a series of virtual workshops with authorities and the residents to get a feedback about the results that we have been got so far. And right now, we are going to begin with this stage of continuous feedback and communication to get to get sure that this technology that is in process of co-production is going to be in the presentation. And I think that in general, the communication with authorities and the local community is always the key to be sure that we are going on the right steps. I don't know if Sole would like to say something.
Thank you, Milton, and thank you, Lina, for the question as well. I think I agree completely with Milton. It's a process, and we need to continue engaging with the different levels of organizations and communities as well. I'm not sure what the exact challenges are in that sort of co-production process in relation to the current crisis. I think that relationship of trust is always important. Perhaps it's easier when we can be there physically because we can connect to people. It's much easier to talk, to communicate, and I think that level is affected by having to be always behind the screen. But in terms of strategy, I think we have, as Milton just explained, we have continued with the strategy. So we have to make sure that we maintain that level of communication, information, sharing ideas. Even if we can't do it in person. My feeling with this crisis is that the problem will be when some people are going to be able to be connected in person and some people will not be able. So that inequality as we come out of the crisis will be challenging, because those that have faster vaccines processes will be able to travel, will be able to go to places, and those that don't will be more exposed and continue to be the most affected by this. So I think as we move forward to the future, now that we're all online, is much easier. So it's more equal in a way. So those that their problem with poverty of access to online resources and everything, but we're all in the same place. The problem is when this becomes a bit more patchy, where I think it's going to be more difficult.
Thank you, Sole. Thank you, Milton. Well, okay, we have a question for Lee, but Lee has had to leave, so we will send him the question, maybe, unless you wanted to address it to someone else. Anyone else? Anyone wants to raise a hand and ask a question, maybe?
Well, maybe while we are waiting for some other questions, I would like also to invite you guys to ask or comment, even if you have some troubles with writing or speaking or making this question in English. You could also write it in Spanish and we will be translating it. So we are waiting for it, please. I think, Martina, we have one question, and this is just for the attendees. And this question says, how would you guys assess the findings of Martina's and Lee's report? Since you have local approach, have you identified the same lags before such daily inhabitants? So, a los compañeros que han estado poniendo atención a las diferentes ponencias, haciendo un enfoque principal a los compañeros que han expuesto, Maritina y Lee, que fueron las personas que han venido, ¿cómo evaluarían esta ponencia y estas conclusiones? How would you assess these presentations? So we wait for your answers. And we also have another one. Would you like to read it, Martina?
Sure. Okay, this is addressed to the new students working on Edinburgh project. We don't know if you are located currently in Edinburgh or not. So what are the challenges that you guys had to encounter while conducting your research under lockdown restrictions and in understanding the Edinburgh context?
I'm happy to take a quick stab at that, and I'm sure my colleagues can join in. I moved to Edinburgh from the States during lockdown, and the news articles all suggested that it was a completely closed down city, so I don't feel like I'm seeing Edinburgh the way Edinburgh is usually seen. It's a heavily touristed city, but right now it's a ghost town. And also during our research, there aren't people walking around to really interview as much, and people are now seen as a threat because they might have the virus, or I might have the virus, and I don't want to kill anyone by asking them to fill out my survey. And so that's why we turned, in our case, to social media and Twitter. We did a little bit of a literature review, thinking about like, well, what's the best way? And there's definitely a digital divide between who accesses Twitter and who uses Twitter. It's rarely elderly people. It's people who have access to internet, usually mobile devices. So there's like a socioeconomic divide, and there's a lot going on there. But given the current conditions of the pandemic, it seemed like the safest way to collect a lot of information. But it has really changed my understanding of Edinburgh in this context.
And I would add that even though we did have challenges, as Lily explained, many things were actually quite easy to do online. One of the wonderful things about, I would say, Scotland in general, not just Edinburgh, is that all the information is online. And so I'm not in Edinburgh, for example, but I didn't have any difficulty finding the documents I needed. One or two books here from the library that's closed, but you know, that was the exception. And this wouldn't have been the case. I know if I had been studying Puerto Rico, where I'm from, and if I'd been away, it would have been difficult. I wouldn't have had access to all the resources I needed, because you actually have to go in person and go to their offices and nag them, give me this, give me that, I need all this information. But that was, you know, that's a wonderful thing about Scotland. Everything is online, everything is accessible. And you know, having classmates that are there, it's a really good and sort of heartwarming type of cooperation where they can visit the site and tell the rest of us who are not there what it looks like and what it feels like. And I mean, I do hope to make it at some point, but it's a good proxy to have.
Okay, thank you, Alex. All right, so there's a comment here. Apart from the current situation regarding the pandemic, Which other obstacles have had for the investigation of transport in Mexico? The government has supported the people of service, or there has been no support and it has been difficult to investigate for these situations. Okay, I guess this one is addressed to Lee as well, but talking in general, I don't think there were, from my personal experience investigating Mexico City while we were there, any obstacles that we might have had were kind of overturned with the help of the students from IPN. I'm not telling that to compliment anyone, but I think that was the important aspect of the whole collaboration, to make the investigation and the communication with locals more accessible. Okay.
We have another one question. Yeah, and this is from Claudia Vasquez, and she'd like to hear from Yishang, Wenhua Kui, Lily, and Alex about how Edinburgh is impacted by crime and the relation it might have with transport and the city structure. Can you please, guys, tell something to Claudia?
I guess I'll start too, because I guess I have the shortest tolerance for long pauses. That's the only thing it's measuring. I am not the most right by any means. Coming from the United States, Scotland feels incredibly safe, and it's hard for me to have a lens of what crime quite is here, because there isn't a lot of they don't have guns, you know? Like, I compare the news from my home city of Sacramento to the news of Edinburgh, I'd say like 3 or 4 times a week, what's on like the front page there. And Sacramento is like, oh, you know, guns, homelessness, guns, violence. In Edinburgh, they had a story recently where there was a petition. It was like one of those social causes, and it was like the police dogs are having a hard time getting health insurance, and like we need to raise money and support the police dogs. And I was like, this is the problem? This seems like an excellent problem. Like, wow. Wow. I guess that's a little bit of an anecdotal insight, but Alex, do you have anything to add?
Yes. So for me, this question is interesting, not being physically there. But something that I have been able to grasp from the research we've done is that, particularly in the deprived areas, like near Granton, Pilton, and Muirhouse, those areas tend to have higher crime levels than the rest of the city. And so it's part of the reason why people are stigmatized there. It's a no-go zone in many ways. And there are videos, for example, from teenagers from the area talking about how people from other parts of the city see them and just sort of run the other way because they think these kids are up to no good. They're up to something dodgy, and it's not the case. But because they come from this area where the crime level is higher, that's the perception that others have of them. And this is very interesting in relation to the city structure, because like we saw in all of those maps that the housing group and ourselves presented, you know, like it's a disadvantaged area. You have the crime sort of localizing in this, but that is disadvantaged. We saw in the bus and tram maps that these are the areas that are going to remain disconnected, even if we have a tram, even if we have bus routes. There's certainly a connection there that I think maybe we have to explore to a deeper level. But yeah, there's certainly a correlation.
Hello, this is Ian, and I would like to add something. So Granton is quite different if you actually been there, because if you see the data from the internet, it will tell you that Granton is the most deprived areas in Edinburgh, and the crime rate is a little bit higher than the other places in the city. However, when you actually been there, it doesn't make you feel that kind of unsafe. Maybe it's because of that UK not allow people to own guns or something, and it's true that you feel a little bit creepy when you walk in Brenton after the sundown, because I don't know if it's because of the coronavirus or something else, because there is nobody else on the road, so it's a little bit creepy. But generally, if you go there in daytime, it feels actually good, because you will see kids running on the streets, and you will see the other residents or something. And during the field trip to Granton, we also did some interview with the residents, and they said they really don't like that the other people in Edinburgh City consider this place, consider them to be the lower class, or consider this Granton area to be the no-go zone or something. So that's it.
That's an interesting point that you raise here, Yin, because I think we had discussions before traveling to Mexico City last year, and we were at the same stage as you are now, where we had our initial research with literature reviews and all the reading maps and articles. And we had created this perception in our head that Mexico City is very dangerous and there's all these issues going on. How are we going to survive there? And then we went there when we met all these people. We went to all these deprived areas, and here we are, we're fine, nothing happened, everyone was really nice. But it's this perception of otherness that creates this rumor around places, and we fail to really see these places as what they are, where these places where people like us live.
Yeah, and what is interesting that the people in Granton is actually very friendly, because when our group are trying to figure out where to go, where to investigate, and there will always be someone come to us to say if we are lost, if we need help or something. But none of this happened when we do during the trip in Newtown or Old Town, and everybody there seems to be busy and they don't care what you're running into or something. So the situation is quite different in Granton.
Okay, Claudius here says that it is a point I wanted to make, because here in Mexico, transport is affected by crime. As you saw in Lee's graphic, there are parts of the city that are neglected from some forms of transport, such as public bicycles, because people in some areas would stall them. So I thought maybe something of the kind could be going on in the areas neglected in Edinburgh.
And there's also missing answer from Andres Eduardo Valdez. And he's asking, what would be the best recommendations to do a site study as shown in the presentations?
Anyone wants to? Recommendations for site study. Well, right now it seems like Google Maps is the best way to do site study. And unless if you're unable to visit your the area. Anyone else, what do you think? Yin, Alex, Sole, anyone else? No. Okay, there's a question for Sol and Milton. What was the motivation to develop your project research in Mexico about the problematic that you presented, and what are the bigger challenges that you have to develop it?
Well, thank you for your sorry. Thank you for your question, Lina. What is the main motivation to develop the project? Well, after together with seismic risk, flood risk is one of the major risks to which Mexico is subject to. And I think that in particular in Mexico City, flooding has been a historical problem to solve. And it seems that it's not enough what has been done so far. New infrastructure is being constructed, new programs are issued every year, but I think the tools to tackle this problem are not enough, and that is one reason. The other reason I think that Sole will go deeper on this answer is that Edinburgh team, before we met Edinburgh team, they had been conducting research in other countries in Latin America, in Brazil and Ecuador and Ecuador. And I think that it's very interesting that the comparison that's going to be possible after the completion of this project. In particular because we are comparing perceptions and local adaptation strategies from the side of the community and from the side of the authorities. There is another point here. The challenges, yes, they are very different. We presented some of the challenges that we are facing with, and the bigger challenges may be the confinement, because as all of the presentations show, the confinement is a radical or forced to a radical modification of methodologies.
Change.
I think that as for the other question, what would be a good strategy? I think that always the local contacts are the key and are very important, independently from the outside situation. In this case, we have been very fortunate to have local contacts at the case studies. We are talking about local leaders that are not just recent known for this project, but they have been working with the community for years, and we are very fortunate to have met them. And that was I was thinking about trust, because it's an opportunity to collaborate with them, but we have to do the things right and to give a concrete response. Sole, would you like to add something?
Thank you, Milton. Yes, I think in terms of motivation and the reason why to work in Mexico City, I think it relates to some of the bigger challenges that I was talking about in the presentation. The growth of population in cities and the sort of the global south, and particularly Latin American cities, being an example of these, and how that generates an increase of areas of different level of sort of, I don't know, services and opportunities to connect to the rest of the city. And particularly what we're interested in working is with those that are less included and more vulnerable, and even those that are perhaps informal or have not yet gone through processes of legalization of their land and their homes. So in a way, it is a city which presents all these inequalities and challenges, and I think that it's a good example of what we're trying to address. But I think at the same time, it is important to understand that we're not looking at these cases, we're looking at the solutions in relation to each particular context, because contextualization is important for everything. We can't just apply the same solution or the same program that we apply in La Colmena, in another part of the city, perhaps, or in another part of Mexico, exactly in the same way. So we can't do that, but we can develop strategies that are actually going to be able to be thought in the different contexts. And even more, during the summer we did a small research around the impact of COVID and the sort of the collective actions that COVID had generated in 3 different cities in Latin America, and this just showed that we can learn a lot from what is happening in extreme cases such as this one, and some of the strategies could be applied in places which have less a kind of lower level of issues to tackle in relation to vulnerability or issues around crime, as was mentioned before. So some of the conclusions of this research, or the experiences at least, could be applied to other contexts, or could be thought in the context of other places. So these comparisons, so that Milton was saying about maybe looking at a range of examples across Latin America, is really, really good database, not just for Latin America, but also for the challenges that we are going to have to confront in cities across Europe. So I think that is key. The other part of the question I can't remember was another part of the question, wasn't it? Oh, I lost it.
What are the bigger
challenges?
How to what are the bigger challenges that you have to face to develop these projects?
Well, I think Milton was very good at giving 4, I think 7 or 8 of these bigger challenges. In terms of, that was more in terms of the process of developing the research and the field work. There are also challenges in relation to the proposal. How do we bring ideas together to create a proposal? And going back to the notion of trust between academics and understanding of their interests and the sort of contextual opportunities, I think is really important to have the space to develop. So sometimes, in the case of Colombia, for example, we have such long trajectory. We had initially a grant, which was this Medellin Urban Innovation, questioning the notion of innovation across different themes, housing and mobility and heritage. But through these, it allowed for a number of conversations to take place, like this one in a way, between academics, trying to understand what are the priorities and the agenda for further research. And that, I think, really helps creating a common understanding of how to work together, and setting the opportunities for these projects, sharing experiences. So yes, we had these experiences in other places, but IPN had other connections and experiences, and there's a significant trust of academic institutions within government organizations in Mexico, for example, that not always happens in other contexts. So I think that the combination of resources and ideas, it's really important, and to understand its importance, we have to develop this collaboration well in advance to a proposal, to developing a proposal. Yeah, I mean, challenges with COVID, Milton can tell you a bit more. There's been all kinds of challenges. These are very vulnerable locations where, people have passed away, or people had been affected kind of very close by friends or members of their family being ill and unwell, and many problems. So yeah, that is a real issue that we have to understand, and does prevent us from reaching people as well, and often in some occasions.
Thank you, Dr. Sol. Here's some more questions, and one of them is to Maritina from Carol Rodas, and she asks, according to your research, have you found similarities in the way of facing some urban problems in your actual living city compared to Mexico City? Thank you.
Well, I'm located in Glasgow, in Scotland, and I don't think the urban problems of Glasgow could be compared to Mexico City because the scale of the city is very different, and the amount of the population and the governance system is very different. So it's a very structured place with rules, and this is why one of the reasons why I was intrigued to start my PhD, because in Glasgow, in Scotland, where we are, the use of placemaking is kind of established within the planning framework, and whereas in places like Mexico, it's more of it's still a process that happens kind of unplanned and with the initiative of communities. So that was my initial. I was thinking, like, how can a concept like placemaking, which has been established in the north, can be applied in the structured countries of, like, very structured environments of countries in the north, can be applied then in the same in contexts of the global south, and have an impact, because the challenges are much greater to deal with, where placemaking might not be enough, or can be another type of placemaking.
Thank you, Maritina.
Here we have another question for Sole and Milton. Have you guys considered how your experience or learning in Mexico City could be applied in Scotland? Obviously, the challenges are very different, but I'm thinking applying similar strategies to aging, demographically fragile communities in the highlands, or economically deprived communities in the Central Belt, for example.
Well, I have not been in Scotland yet, but I, as for the bibliographical review that we have been conducted so far, we know that there is a big advantage in Europe, that the concepts and methods for co-production and co-creation are well known and were developed in Europe, especially in Europe. And I think that could be a good point for beginning to continue developing this kind of technologies. That is what I could say to this question.
I totally agree, Milton. I think that there is a lot to learn, and there is a really interesting context, Scotland particularly, because we have an interesting regulatory environment under the Empowerment Act. So it's a law that exists within Scotland that allows for people to take ownership of buildings and land with a community aim, in a way. And this is something that is quite unique from Scotland, and is growing, and it could potentially be offering opportunities to think about resources and the management, or the co-management, community management of resources. So there are really interesting examples here. But I do think that we do have a lot to learn from both sides. Scotland at the moment, Edinburgh particularly, has a really strong sort of sustainability agenda at the moment, and they want to make sure that we transform the emissions of the city, we lower the emissions, and we transform the quality of the place, and the quality of the urban fabric to be more sustainable. So there are initiatives around maybe looking at heritage buildings and changing, improving the conditions internally from these. But also there's a strategy that is going to be tested under the 20-minute neighborhoods, Initially, we are going to test it in Granton, looking at the needs and opportunities of neighborhoods within 20 minutes walking distance. So what do we have at 20 minutes to make these neighborhoods more inclusive? So in the context of your question around aging and demographically fragile communities. So I think there's a number of strategies that we can sort of match with the findings and experiences of the project and create a set of tools and ideas. That's probably what I would add.
Okay, thank you both. So there is one last question. Maybe we could address this one and wrap up because we are over time. It's again for you, Sole and Milton. Could you please talk about the costs and how are these projects being financed? Is it promoted by local government, charities, private organization? Does the community contribute monetarily?
Of course. The project is being financed in Mexico by the National Council for Science and Technology, CONACYT, and the United Kingdom is giving a correspondent final budget as well as equal or corresponding to Mexico. And in the case of the UK, I think they are being financed by the ESRC, the Economic Social Council for Research and Development. And this is a very interesting call, because one of the conditions to participate in the call for smart city solutions that we were presenting was that the teams, the research teams should be integrated in the most possible equally way between UK researchers and Mexican researchers. And in the side of CONACYT, the International Cooperation Department is in charge of this administration. So the communities, of course, are not contributing monetarily to. Of course, all the financing is in charge of the governments.
Yes, I mean, Milton explained it very well. So this is sort of national research funding that countries have. In the case of the UK, there is an interest. There was a growing interest in the last few years to dedicate part of the resources the UK had for development aid to research. So before, it used to be that those resources were split through a number of NGO organizations or development banks across the world, and they were based on very small, well, relatively small projects. And what they did a couple of years ago was to bring all of these resources into together into a much larger fund, which was called the Global Challenges Research Fund, and that was aimed at sort of interlinking research with development. So it had to be research that was leading to clear impact on the ground, to economic development, to achieving the sustainable goals, to inclusion of gender and improving inequalities and all of these sort of broader goals. So in the case of the UK, the funding environment is changing, but it was channeled through all of these different research councils. So the UK doesn't have only one research council like Mexico, but has many according to different fields. So this one in particular was managed by the Economic and Science and Social Sciences and Economy Research Council.
Right.
There's one more question to Lily. So if you want, we can address it to Lily and he could answer it after, or we can ask Lily to respond it. Or are we wrapping up now? Right.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know. I guess I missed this question. Sorry. Well, yeah, we are 12 minutes over time, so we shouldn't keep you all any longer. Well, first of all, thank you all for participating. The amount of participants exceeded our expectations, so that's very hopeful for the future to kind of get together and do more of these things. Thank you, Sole and Milton, for your presentation. Thank you, Alex, Lily, and Yin, and Wenhuan. I'm trying to find your names. I'm sorry, and for presenting. Thank you, George, for moderating. And hopefully we will meet again soon under better conditions and not in little windows on a screen. Anything else? Anything to add? Veronica, Carlos?
I just
Um,
Yes.
to you. It's been fantastic that you did excellent work organizing these, all of you. So well done. Thank you so much. And I like the first year anniversary. I hope there's going to be a second year anniversary and a third year anniversary.
Yes, we're looking for it, and hopefully it would happen in the future. So I just would like to thank you, all of you speakers and audience, and our staff, and George, of course, and Dr. Sole, Dr. Milton, for accepting us, for accepting this invitation. And thank you to all the people attending here, and for their participation and their enthusiasm. And thank you, and hopefully it will be a second year anniversary and more. Thank you.
Yes, we're very grateful with all of you guys. Without you, this event wouldn't have been possible. So we want to thank you, even the new students, that this activity has been new for all of them. We would like you to be here with us in Mexico. We expect to have you here with us. So let's hope this situation gets over, and so then you could come to visit us and to make some other researches with us.
Or
with
you
this,
class in Edinburgh.
oh yeah,
You're
we would
always-
love to go.
And you should stay in touch, and we're easy to find. Our emails are going to be shared with you.
That would be amazing. So we're willing with this event to have more, like you have said, to have more events like this. Why not to do some researches together? And so to keep this moment, we would like to take a picture. And if it is possible for you, we would like to ask you to turn on your cameras, just in order to take a little screenshot.
I take a moment just to say that not long ago, people was betting this was not possible to be done, at least here in Mexico, and we're very happy to have such kind of events. Thank you all for being part of this.
Thank you, George. So everybody's turning on their cameras. Who is taking it, Vero or Maritina, or?
Yeah, I'll take them.
So turn on your smiling mood and hold your smile, please.
Okay. All right, because we have 3 separate windows, so.
Yeah. We need to hold it.
Sorry. 1. Two. Okay, smile, 2, and And 3, perfect. Thank you so much, guys, and stay safe, stay healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll keep in touch. So always we will let you know if we organize something else, to what's next. So we'll keep in touch. Thank you very much, guys, and see you
Keep
then.
visiting our website as well, please.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.